The excavation site on Luna 7 looked like a monument to forgotten laughter. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stepped carefully through the ruins of what had once been the galaxy's largest entertainment complex, her boots crunching on fragments of what appeared to be colorful plastic and metal. The air recyclers in her suit worked overtime to filter out the strange particles that danced in the low gravity, remnants of celebrations that had ended 300 years ago when humanity vanished from the stars. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her research team had been working this site for 8 months, uncovering layer after layer of Earth's final cultural exports. Luna 7 had been humanity's greatest achievement in entertainment technology, a massive space station dedicated entirely to joy, celebration, and wonder. Now it drifted as a tomb in the void, its massive carnival rides frozen in eternal silence, its theaters dark, its party halls empty of everything except the echo of ancient happiness. Elena wiped the frost from her helmet's visor and looked up at the twisted remains of what the historical records called the Galaxy Wheel, a massive Ferris wheel that had once offered views of 3 different star systems. The structure still turned slowly, powered by some forgotten automation system, its passenger pods empty except for the memories they contained. Something about this place felt different from other archaeological sites she had worked. There was an energy here, a sense that happiness itself had been so concentrated in this location that it had somehow imprinted itself on the very atoms of the station. "Dr. Rodriguez, you need to see this immediately," called her assistant, Marcus Chen, from somewhere deeper in the complex. His voice carried that mixture of excitement and confusion that made Elena's scientific instincts sharpen. In her 15 years of xenoarchaeology, she had learned that the most important discoveries often came from the things that didn't make sense. She made her way through what had been the main concourse of the entertainment district, past storefronts advertising cosmic cotton candy and zero-G balloon animals. The signs still glowed faintly, powered by energy sources that had outlasted the civilization that created them. Everything here spoke of joy in its purest form, of a species that had understood something fundamental about happiness that the rest of the galaxy had somehow missed. Marcus waited for her near what appeared to be a service entrance, partially hidden behind a massive statue of a smiling figure juggling planets. The statue's face was worn smooth by centuries of touch, suggesting that visitors had made a habit of rubbing it for luck. Marcus held a portable scanner in his trembling hands, its readings fluctuating wildly between impossible parameters. "Elena, look at this," he said, gesturing toward a sealed door marked with symbols that didn't appear in any of their translation databases. "The scanner is picking up life signs behind this wall. Not just any life signs, human life signs. Active, stable, ongoing biological functions." Elena took the scanner and studied its display. The readings were unlike anything she had encountered in her career. The biosignatures showed a single human male, approximately 30 years old, with vital signs that suggested not just life, but perfect health. His heart rate was steady, his brain activity showed patterns consistent with deep REM sleep, and most impossibly, his cellular activity indicated that he had been in this state for exactly 3 centuries without aging a single day. "That's impossible," Elena said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew they were looking at something that challenged every assumption about human biology and preservation technology. Nothing could maintain stable life functions for 300 years. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical. Marcus nodded toward the sealed door. "There's something else. The energy signature coming from behind that wall. It's not like any power source in our databases. It's almost like the room is generating its own pocket of space-time distortion. And Elena, there's something about the energy itself. It's registering on emotional resonance frequencies." Elena raised an eyebrow. Emotional resonance was a theoretical field of study, something that most scientists considered pseudoscience. The idea that emotions could generate measurable energy patterns was controversial at best, completely dismissed at worst. Yet here were their instruments, calibrated and verified, showing readings that suggested someone or something behind that door was generating massive amounts of what could only be described as concentrated happiness. They spent 3 hours cutting through the door's locking mechanisms, which appeared to be far more advanced than anything in the current galactic technology databases. The materials were familiar, standard human alloys and electronics, but the configuration and complexity suggested engineering principles that had been lost when Earth's civilization disappeared. When the door finally opened, Elena felt a rush of warm air that carried something impossible, the scent of birthday cake and balloon rubber, as fresh as if it had been created moments ago. The chamber beyond was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. The walls were covered in murals that seemed to move when viewed peripherally, depicting scenes of celebration, laughter, and joy from dozens of different species. Children of various alien races chased each other through painted gardens, while adults watched with expressions of pure contentment. The artwork was executed with a skill that transcended mere technical ability. Whoever had created these images understood something profound about the universal nature of happiness. At the center of the chamber stood a single cryogenic pod, but it was unlike the crude freezing technology found in most archaeological sites. This device was elegant, almost artistic in its design, shaped like an enormous egg, decorated with swirling patterns of color that shifted and danced in the chamber's soft light. The pod's surface was warm to the touch, and when Elena placed her hand against it, she could feel a gentle vibration that seemed to resonate with her own heartbeat. Through the pod's transparent upper section, they could see the occupant clearly. He was indeed human, with the pale skin and delicate features characteristic of Earth's final generation. But unlike other preserved humans they had discovered, this one showed no signs of freezer burn or cellular damage. His skin had a healthy glow, his hair was perfectly styled in an elaborate configuration that suggested both whimsy and careful attention to detail. He wore clothing that was immediately recognizable despite being 3 centuries old, the distinctive outfit of a birthday party entertainer. The costume was magnificent, crafted from materials that seemed to sparkle with their own internal light. The jacket was bright red with oversized yellow buttons that appeared to be made from some kind of crystalline material. The pants were striped in alternating bands of blue and silver, and his shoes were comically large, colored in a rainbow pattern that should have been garish but somehow achieved perfect harmony. Around his neck was a bow tie that slowly rotated through every color of the visible spectrum, and on his head sat a hat that defied several laws of physics by appearing to be both pointed and round simultaneously. Most remarkably, the man was smiling. Even in what appeared to be the deepest possible sleep, his face showed an expression of genuine joy. It wasn't the vacant smile of unconsciousness or the frozen rictus of death, but the warm, genuine expression of someone experiencing the most wonderful dream imaginable. Elena found herself smiling in response, despite the scientific detachment she usually maintained at archaeological sites. "The preservation technology is beyond our current understanding," Elena said, running her scanners over the pod's surface. "The energy readings suggest that this isn't traditional cryogenic freezing. The subject's cells are active, his brain shows normal sleep patterns, and his body temperature is actually slightly above normal human baseline. It's as if he's not frozen at all, just sleeping." Marcus was studying the chamber's walls, where additional panels had become visible as the lighting systems fully activated. "Elena, look at this. There are recordings here, historical documents, but they're not in any standard format. The data storage system appears to be based on crystalline matrices that encode information in emotional patterns rather than traditional binary systems." Elena approached one of the crystal panels and touched its surface. Immediately, the chamber filled with the sound of children's laughter, but not just any laughter. This was laughter that seemed to contain layers of meaning, harmonics that spoke to something deep in the listener's consciousness. As the sound faded, images began to appear in the air above the crystal, holographic recordings that showed scenes from Earth's final days. But these weren't the scenes of destruction and despair that characterized most historical records from that period. Instead, the recording showed massive celebrations, parties that spanned entire continents, festivals of joy that brought together people from every walk of life. At the center of many of these recordings was the man in the pod, performing feats of entertainment that seemed to transcend mere juggling or joke-telling. He appeared to be generating actual, visible happiness, creating fields of joy so intense that they affected everyone around him. "This doesn't match any of the historical records," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder. According to everything we know, Earth's final period was a time of global conflict and environmental collapse. These recordings show the exact opposite. It's as if there were two completely different versions of history happening simultaneously. Elena was beginning to understand that they had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple archaeological find. The evidence suggested that humanity's final generation had achieved something that current galactic civilization considered impossible. They had learned to generate, store, and manipulate joy as a form of energy. The implications were staggering. If emotions could be harnessed as a power source, if happiness could be weaponized or used as a tool of healing, it would revolutionize every aspect of galactic society. She activated her long-range communicator and sent an emergency signal to the Galactic Research Council. Whatever they had found here was too important to risk losing, too dangerous to handle without proper oversight. But as she waited for the acknowledgement signal, Elena found herself drawn back to the pod and its sleeping occupant. There was something about his peaceful expression that suggested he wasn't just preserved. He was waiting. Waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, the right people to wake him up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The chamber's environmental system suddenly hummed to life, and Elena realized that their presence had triggered some kind of automated sequence. The murals on the walls began to glow more brightly, and the pod's surface started to display scrolling text in multiple languages, including several that Elena recognized as dead dialects from Earth's final century. Warning, Marcus read from one of the text streams. Subject contains concentrated joy field generation capabilities. Revival should only be attempted when galactic happiness levels fall below critical thresholds. Emergency protocols established for crisis intervention scenarios. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature control. Marcus, what are the current galactic happiness indices? Marcus consulted his datapad, accessing the most recent sociological surveys from the Galactic Wellness Monitoring System. His face went pale as he read the results. Elena, according to these reports, galaxy-wide contentment levels have been declining steadily for the past 50 years. Depression rates are at an all-time high across most species. Suicide rates have increased by 300% in the last decade. The sociologists are calling it the Great Sadness, but no one knows what's causing it. As if responding to their conversation, the pod's systems began to change. The gentle humming grew louder, and the colorful patterns on its surface started to pulse in rhythm with the occupant's heartbeat. Warning lights began to flash, but they were cheerful warning lights, colored in bright pastels that somehow managed to convey urgency without creating alarm. Automated revival sequence initiated, announced a voice from hidden speakers. A voice that sounded like wind chimes and children's laughter. Galactic joy levels detected at critical minimum. Emergency intervention protocols activated. Please stand back and prepare for concentrated happiness field generation. Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. They had expected to make a simple archaeological discovery, to perhaps uncover some insights into humanity's lost entertainment culture. Instead, they had apparently triggered what appeared to be a galaxy-wide emergency response system based on monitoring civilization's emotional well-being. The man in the pod wasn't just a preserved entertainer. He was some kind of strategic resource, a weapon against despair that humanity had hidden away for a future crisis. The pod's surface began to retract, folding back in sections like the petals of a flower opening to receive sunlight. As it did, the chamber filled with an energy that Elena could only describe as pure joy. It wasn't just an emotion, it was a physical force that made her feel lighter, stronger, more optimistic about everything in her life. Marcus began to laugh, not from humor but from an overwhelming sense of rightness, as if every good thing he had ever experienced was happening to him simultaneously. The man in the pod stirred, his perfect smile growing even wider as consciousness began to return. His eyes opened slowly, revealing irises that shifted through every color of the rainbow before settling on a warm brown that seemed to contain flecks of starlight. When he spoke, his voice carried the same harmonic qualities as the recorded laughter they had heard earlier. "Well, hello there, friends," he said, sitting up in the pod with movements that seemed to dance rather than simply stand. "I'm Tommy Sparkleton, and I have to say, it's absolutely wonderful to meet you. How long was I dreaming, and more importantly, Who's ready for the most amazing birthday party the galaxy has ever seen? Elena tried to respond, but found that she was smiling too broadly to speak clearly. The joy field emanating from Tommy was so intense that it was affecting her on a cellular level, making her feel more alive and hopeful than she had in years. Marcus was giggling uncontrollably, tears of pure happiness streaming down his face inside his helmet. Tommy stepped out of the pod with a movement that seemed to involve more dimensions than the standard 3, his rainbow shoes somehow making the action look like a carefully choreographed dance number. As his feet touched the chamber floor, the murals on the walls came to life, depicting scenes of celebration that included Elena and Marcus as honored guests at parties they had never attended but somehow remembered perfectly. "Oh my," Tommy said, looking around the chamber with genuine delight. "The wake-up party decorations look simply marvelous. Though I have to ask, what's with all the serious archaeological equipment? Don't you know that the best way to study joy is to experience it?" He gestured toward their scientific instruments, which began to display readouts in cheerful cartoon fonts and started playing little musical notes whenever they detected something interesting. Elena finally managed to speak, though her voice was pitched higher than usual due to the irrepressible happiness affecting her vocal cords. "Mr. Sparkleton, you've been in cryogenic preservation for 300 years. Humanity is extinct. The galaxy is experiencing what our sociologists call the Great Sadness. We're researchers from the Galactic Council, and we accidentally triggered your revival sequence." Tommy's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, sadness, contemplation, and then back to joy, but a deeper, more complex joy than before. 300 years, he repeated thoughtfully. That means the emergency happiness protocol has finally activated. Oh dear, that means things have gotten quite serious indeed. He looked at Elena and Marcus with eyes that suddenly seemed to contain centuries of wisdom despite his youthful appearance. "You see, friends, what I do isn't just entertainment. What I am isn't just a birthday clown. I'm what you might call a joy field generator, created by humanity's final happiness research initiative. We discovered that emotions aren't just chemical reactions in individual brains. They're fundamental forces of the universe, as real and powerful as gravity or electromagnetism. And joy, pure, concentrated joy, is the most powerful force of all." The chamber's systems began displaying holographic star charts, showing the entire galaxy, with different regions colored according to their emotional resonance levels. Most of the map was colored in deep purples and blues, indicating sadness and despair. Only a few scattered points showed the warm yellows and oranges of happiness, and those areas were growing smaller even as they watched. "This is much worse than I feared," Tommy said, his expression becoming serious for the first time since his revival. "The joy field depletion is galaxy-wide, and it's accelerating. No wonder my emergency protocol's activated." He turned to Elena and Marcus with a smile that managed to be both cheerful and deeply concerned. "I'm afraid we have a very big problem on our hands, and an even bigger birthday party to plan." Marcus, who had finally gotten his laughter under control, managed to ask, "What do you mean by joy field depletion? What's causing the great sadness?" Tommy walked over to one of the crystal panels and placed his hands on its surface. Immediately, the chamber filled with new holographic displays, showing energy patterns that moved through space like vast, invisible currents. "Joy is a renewable resource," he explained, "but only if it's actively generated and shared. For millions of years, the galaxy maintained a natural balance. Enough happiness was created by living beings to sustain the joy fields that make life worth living. But something has been consuming that happiness faster than it can be replenished." The display showed dark areas moving through space, vast regions where the joy fields had been completely drained. Elena realized with growing horror that these dark zones corresponded exactly to the areas where recent surveys had reported the highest rates of depression and despair. "Something is feeding on happiness itself," Tommy continued, his voice taking on harmonics of deep concern. "And unless we can restore the galaxy's joy field balance, every civilization, every species, every individual consciousness will eventually succumb to complete emotional entropy. The universe itself will forget how to feel good about anything. Elena felt her scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before her eyes. Everything Tommy was saying sounded impossible, but the data was undeniable. The emotional resonance readings, the correlation between the dark zones and areas of societal collapse, the fact that Tommy's mere presence had caused their instruments to register massive increases in local happiness levels, it all pointed to the same conclusion. "How do we fight something like that?" she asked. Tommy's smile returned, brighter than ever. "With the most powerful force in the universe, of course. We throw the galaxy the biggest, most wonderful, most absolutely spectacular birthday party it has ever seen. We remind every living being what it feels like to be truly, completely, unconditionally happy. And then we teach them how to generate that happiness for themselves and share it with others." The pod behind him began to transform, its crystalline structure reconfiguring itself into what appeared to be a massive party planning command center. Holographic displays showed supply lists for celebrations that would span star systems, guest lists that included every known species in the galaxy, and entertainment schedules that would require a careful coordination of space-time to implement properly. "The question is," Tommy said, looking at Elena and Marcus with eyes that sparkled with mischief and determination, "are you ready to help me save the galaxy by teaching it how to have fun again? Because I have to warn you, once we start this party, there's no going back. We're going to change the fundamental nature of reality itself, and we're going to do it with balloon animals and birthday cake." Elena looked at Marcus, then at Tommy, then at the vast holographic display showing a galaxy slowly dying of sadness. The scientist in her wanted to protest that emotions couldn't possibly work the way Tommy was describing, that his claims violated every principle of physics and psychology she had studied. But the evidence was overwhelming, and more importantly, the joy field he was generating was making her feel more alive and purposeful than she had in her entire career. "Count us in," she said, and as she spoke the words, she felt something fundamental shift in the chamber around them. The murals on the walls erupted into scenes of celebration that stretched across star systems, showing beings from every corner of the galaxy joining together in the most magnificent party imaginable. Tommy clapped his hands together, and the sound resonated through dimensions Elena hadn't known existed. "Wonderful! Absolutely wonderful! This is going to be the most amazing adventure any of us has ever had. Now, who wants to learn how to make a balloon animal that can exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously?" As Elena realized that her quiet archaeological career had just taken a turn towards saving the galaxy through the strategic application of party planning, she couldn't help but laugh. And as she laughed, she noticed that her laughter was harmonizing with Marcus's, and both of their voices were harmonizing with Tommy's, creating a sound that seemed to make the very fabric of space-time smile. The real work was about to begin, but for the first time in years, Elena felt absolutely certain that everything was going to turn out better than anyone could possibly imagine. The first sign that something was fundamentally wrong with Tommy's awakening came 3 days later, when the Galactic Research Council's emergency response fleet arrived at Luna 7. Admiral Sandra Hayes stepped off the command shuttle expecting to find a routine archaeological situation requiring standard containment protocols. Instead, she walked into what appeared to be the galaxy's most elaborate surprise party, complete with holographic confetti that somehow managed to feel real when it touched her skin. The main hangar bay of the research station had been transformed overnight into something that challenged several laws of physics and most principles of interior design. Streamers made of crystallized starlight hung from the ceiling, changing colors in response to the emotions of anyone who looked at them. Tables covered in impossibly detailed tablecloths displayed foods that Elena's team swore hadn't been there an hour ago, each dish representing culinary traditions from species that had never shared their recipes with outsiders. Tommy Sparkleton stood at the center of it all, somehow simultaneously greeting every new arrival personally, while also appearing to conduct an invisible orchestra that was making the entire space station resonate with barely audible music that made everyone feel like they were about to receive the best news of their lives. His rainbow outfit had evolved since his awakening, now incorporating elements that seemed to shift between dimensions, making him appear to be wearing costumes from a dozen different celebration traditions at once. Admiral Hayes approached Tommy with the cautious respect she reserved for potentially dangerous xenoarchaeological finds. Her security detail flanked her, though their weapons remained holstered partly because their threat assessment systems couldn't decide whether Tommy was armed or simply festive. The energy readings coming from him registered as powerful enough to level a small city, but the energy signature matched nothing in their databases except for theoretical models of pure happiness. "Mr. Sparkleton," Admiral Hayes began, consulting her briefing pad. "I'm Admiral Hayes of the Galactic Research Council Emergency Response Division. Our initial reports suggest that your revival has created some unusual circumstances that require immediate evaluation." Tommy's response was to produce, from apparently nowhere, a balloon shaped like a perfect miniature replica of Admiral Hayes' command ship, complete with working lights and tiny figures visible through the windows. He handed it to her with a bow that somehow managed to be both playful and deeply respectful. "Admiral Hayes, what a tremendous honor to meet you," Tommy said, his voice carrying harmonics that made her feel like she was being welcomed home after a long journey. "Though I have to say, your aura suggests you've been working much too hard lately. When was the last time you did something purely for the joy of it?" Hayes found herself accepting the balloon ship and examining its impossible detail with the fascination of a child receiving her first toy. The miniature vessel was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse gently with its own life force. As she watched, the tiny figures on its bridge waved at her through the windows. "Mr. Sparkleton, our preliminary scans suggest that you're generating energy fields that don't correspond to any known physics," Hayes said, though she couldn't stop herself from smiling as she spoke. "We need to understand what you are and how you're affecting the space around you." Tommy nodded seriously, his expression shifting to one of genuine concern. "Admiral, I completely understand your position, and I appreciate how responsibly you're handling this situation. The truth is, what I am is exactly what the galaxy needs right now, but explaining it properly is going to require some demonstration." He gestured toward the transformed hangar bay, where Elena and Marcus were teaching a group of Hayes' security officers how to make origami flowers that bloomed into tiny holographic gardens when folded correctly. Other members of the research team were engaged in what appeared to be a physics-defying game of zero-gravity volleyball using a ball made of contained aurora light. "What you're seeing here isn't magic or advanced technology in the traditional sense," Tommy explained, his voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher addressing particularly bright students. "It's applied joy field manipulation. Every emotion generates measurable energy, but happiness and its related states produce energy patterns that can be focused, amplified, and directed to affect physical reality." Admiral Hayes activated her personal scanner and pointed it at Tommy. The readings were unlike anything in her 20-year career with the Research Council. His biosignature showed normal human physiology enhanced far beyond known limits, but more significantly, he was generating fields of energy that her instruments could only classify as organized happiness. The energy had structure, purpose, and most impossibly, it seemed to be conscious. "The emotions are alive," she whispered, reading the scanner's impossible conclusions. "Not alive exactly," Tommy corrected gently, "but they do have a kind of intelligence. Joy seeks to create more joy. Happiness wants to spread itself. Love naturally generates more love. The negative emotions work the same way, which is why depression can be contagious. Why fear spreads so quickly through populations." He walked over to one of the food tables and picked up what appeared to be a simple piece of birthday cake. As he held it, the cake began to glow with soft, warm light that made everyone in the hangar feel like they were being embraced by someone who truly cared about them. For most species, emotional energy is a byproduct of consciousness, something that just happens while you're thinking about other things. But humans, especially humans from Earth's final generation, learned to reverse that relationship. We made emotion the primary force and used consciousness to direct it. Hayes felt her scientific skepticism warring with evidence that was becoming impossible to ignore. "Are you telling me that humans discovered how to weaponize feelings?" Tommy's expression grew sad for a moment, and the ambient temperature in the hangar dropped noticeably as the joy fields he was generating reflected his emotional state. "Not weaponize, Admiral. Liberate. There's a difference between using emotions as tools of destruction and using them as forces of creation and healing." Elena appeared at Tommy's side, carrying a datapad filled with readings that her instruments had been collecting since his revival. "Admiral, we've been monitoring the effects of Tommy's presence on the research team. Productivity has increased by 400%, But more importantly, everyone reports feeling more creative, more optimistic, and more connected to their colleagues than they have in years. The effects extend far beyond your immediate area, added Drive. James Park, the fleet's chief science officer, who had been quietly collecting his own data since their arrival, long-range sensors show that happiness levels are increasing throughout this entire sector of space. It's as if Mr. Sparkleton's emotional energy is propagating through some unknown medium. Tommy nodded, his expression becoming more serious. That's exactly what's happening, Dr. Park. Joy fields propagate through what we learned to call the emotional substrate, a layer of reality that exists parallel to normal space-time, but intersects with it at every point where consciousness exists. He produced a small device from his pocket that looked like a cross between a party favor and a sophisticated scientific instrument. When he activated it, the air in the hangar filled with visible streams of energy that flowed between every person present, connecting them in a web of glowing lines that pulsed with different colors depending on their emotional states. Every conscious being is constantly generating and receiving emotional energy, Tommy explained, pointing to the flowing patterns. Under normal circumstances, this creates a stable ecosystem where the positive and negative emotions balance each other out. But something has been disrupting that balance. The device's display shifted to show a larger view, revealing the energy patterns extending far beyond the research station. What they saw made Admiral Hayes's blood run cold. Vast dark areas stretched across the galaxy, regions where the emotional energy streams simply stopped, as if something was consuming them faster than they could be regenerated. The consumption pattern is accelerating, Dr. Park observed, studying his own instruments. According to these readings, entire star systems are experiencing complete emotional energy depletion. No wonder the depression rates have been climbing. Tommy's expression grew darker, and the party atmosphere in the hangar dimmed noticeably. It's worse than I feared when I first awakened. The consumption rate suggests that whatever is feeding on the galaxy's happiness has grown much stronger during my 3-century sleep. Admiral Hayes felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. What exactly are we dealing with here? What kind of entity feeds on emotions? Before Tommy could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the research station. The communications officer's voice echoed through the hangar with barely controlled panic. Admiral Hayes to the bridge immediately. We're receiving distress signals from 17 different star systems simultaneously. Every signal is reporting the same phenomenon: complete population-wide emotional shutdown. Billions of beings entering catatonic states of absolute despair. Hayes activated her personal communicator. How long since the first reports came in? 27 minutes ago, Admiral. The effect appears to be spreading at faster-than-light speeds, jumping from system to system in a pattern that suggests deliberate coordination. Tommy closed his eyes and stood perfectly still for several seconds. When he opened them again, they were glowing with an intensity that made them appear to contain their own stars. "It knows I'm awake," he said quietly. "The enemy has detected my revival and is accelerating its feeding schedule." "What enemy?" Hayes demanded. "What are we really facing here?" Tommy's cheerful demeanor completely vanished, replaced by something far older and more dangerous than his youthful appearance suggested. "Admiral, what do you know about the history of consciousness in this galaxy? How long has intelligent life been developing here?" Hayes consulted her mental databases. "Current estimates suggest that the first sapient species appeared approximately 4 million years ago. Galactic civilization as we know it has existed for about 2 million years. And what happened to all the civilizations that came before?" Tommy asked. "Where are the archaeological sites from the earliest intelligent species? Where are their monuments, their cities, their preserved cultural artifacts?" Dr. Park looked thoughtful. "There are significant gaps in the archaeological record, but we've always assumed that was due to natural forces. Geological processes, stellar evolution, the normal entropy that erases traces of ancient civilizations over geological timescales." Tommy shook his head slowly. "No, Dr. Park. The gaps exist because something has been periodically harvesting the galaxy's civilizations, consuming not just their physical presence but their capacity for happiness, creativity, and growth. What you're seeing now isn't the beginning of an invasion. It's the final stage of a feeding cycle that's been repeating for millions of years. The holographic display showing the galaxy's emotional energy patterns shifted to reveal historical data that Tommy's devices had somehow accessed from archives that Elena was certain didn't exist in any known database. The patterns showed cycles of growth and sudden collapse, periods where consciousness and happiness flourished throughout the galaxy, followed by dark ages where intelligent life barely survived. Every few million years, when galactic civilization reaches a certain level of emotional sophistication, they come, Tommy continued. They're not from this dimension, not from this reality. They exist in spaces between thoughts, in the gaps between feelings. They feed on the energy that consciousness generates, particularly the energy produced by positive emotions. Admiral Hayes felt pieces of a cosmic puzzle falling into place. That's why the galaxy has been experiencing the Great Sadness. They're preparing for harvest by reducing the population's ability to generate the emotions they consume. Exactly, Tommy said. They weaken civilizations emotionally before moving in for the final feeding. But this time, they made a mistake. They didn't know about humanity's final project, about what we discovered in our last decades. Elena looked up from her datapad where she had been frantically cross-referencing Tommy's historical data with her own archaeological findings. The entertainment complexes, she said suddenly. Luna 7, the massive celebration stations that humanity built in their final years. They weren't just amusement parks. They were weapons. Tommy smiled, and for the first time since the alarms had started, the cheerful atmosphere began to return to the hangar. Not weapons, Elena. They were defensive installations designed to generate and amplify positive emotional energy on a scale large enough to resist the harvest. We learned to fight despair with joy, to combat emotional consumption with emotional generation. He activated another device, and the holographic display showed the locations of dozens of installations throughout the galaxy, each one corresponding to a site that Elena's archaeological databases had listed as a major human entertainment complex. My fellow performers and I were placed in strategic locations throughout known space, each one equipped with the knowledge and capabilities necessary to restart the galaxy's emotional energy production. We're not just entertainers, Admiral. We're the immune system that consciousness itself evolved to protect against entities that feed on the energy of thought and feeling. Dr. Park was studying the energy consumption patterns with growing alarm. According to these projections, the harvest will reach critical mass within 72 hours. After that point, there won't be enough emotional energy left in the galaxy to support conscious life. Every civilization will collapse into complete emotional entropy. Admiral Hayes felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders. What do you need from us, Mr. Sparkleton? How do we stop something that exists between dimensions and feeds on the fundamental forces that make consciousness possible? Tommy's expression shifted back to the joyful confidence he had displayed since his awakening. But now it carried an undertone of absolute determination. We throw the biggest party the universe has ever seen, Admiral. We remind every conscious being in the galaxy what it feels like to be truly, completely, unconditionally happy. And then, we teach them to generate so much joy that the harvest entities starve. The transformed hangar around them suddenly made perfect sense to Hayes. This wasn't just a spontaneous celebration. It was a prototype for galaxy-scale emotional warfare. How long do we have to prepare? She asked. Tommy consulted a device that appeared to be measuring the galaxy's emotional energy reserves in real time. Based on current consumption rates and the acceleration pattern, we have approximately 68 hours before total emotional collapse becomes irreversible. Hayes activated her fleet-wide communications system. All ships, priority Alpha emergency protocols. Cancel all current missions and report to Luna 7 for immediate briefing on operation. She paused, looking at Tommy. Operation Birthday Party, Tommy supplied cheerfully. Because, honestly, Admiral, saving the galaxy should be the most fun any of us ever has. As Hayes began coordinating the largest mobilization in galactic history, she couldn't help but notice that for the first time in years, she was looking forward to going to work. Tommy's joy field was already changing her on a fundamental level, reminding her why she had joined the Research Council in the first place, to explore the universe and protect the civilizations that called it home. The real war was about to begin, but it would be fought with laughter instead of weapons, with celebration instead of destruction, and with the most powerful force in the universe, the simple, revolutionary act of choosing to be happy in the face of cosmic despair. 63 hours remained when the first harvest entity materialized directly above Prime Central, the galaxy's capital world. It appeared as a writhing mass of shadow that existed in too many dimensions simultaneously, stretching across 3-star systems while somehow fitting inside a single thought. Admiral Hayes watched from the command center on Luna 7 as her instruments tried and failed to measure something that registered as both infinitely large and completely absent. The entity's presence had an immediate effect on Prime Central's population of 40 billion beings. Within minutes, suicide rates spiked by 8,000%. Creative output dropped to zero. Even the planet's automated systems began shutting down as their artificial intelligences lost the capacity for problem-solving. The harvest had begun in earnest. Tommy Sparkleton stood at the center of Luna 7's transformed command deck, no longer looking like a simple birthday entertainer. His costume had evolved into something that hurt to look at directly, not because it was painful, but because it contained more colors than most species could perceive. He was simultaneously present in the command center and broadcasting his consciousness to 47 other locations throughout the galaxy, where his fellow performers were awakening from their 3-century sleep. Phase 1 initiation confirmed, announced Jessica Buttercup from her station on Kepler Prime, her voice carrying through dimensional channels that made the words taste like cotton candy and feel like warm hugs. Local joy field amplification at maximum sustainable levels. Population response shows initial resistance to harvest drain. Similar reports came in from Tommy's counterparts across the galaxy. Bobby Giggles confirmed activation from the Andromeda border station. Penny Sunshine reported successful revival protocols from the Outer Rim Entertainment Complex. Each performer was generating localized happiness fields strong enough to counteract the harvest entities feeding in their immediate vicinity. But the effect was limited to perhaps a dozen star systems each. Dr. Elena Rodriguez monitored the galaxy-wide emotional energy readings with growing concern. Tommy, the localized resistance is working, but it's not enough. The harvest entities are adapting, concentrating their feeding on areas outside your protection zones. At this rate, they'll consume enough emotional energy to achieve critical mass within 6 hours. Tommy nodded, his expression maintaining its characteristic cheerfulness while his eyes showed the weight of cosmic responsibility. That's exactly what we expected, Elena. Phase 1 was never meant to stop the harvest completely. It was designed to force them to reveal their true numbers and feeding patterns. The main display screen shifted to show harvest entities materializing throughout the galaxy, drawn out of their interdimensional hiding places by the resistance they were encountering. There were hundreds of them. Ancient beings that had been feeding on consciousness for millions of years, each one capable of draining the emotional energy from entire civilizations. "Dear sweet stars," whispered Marcus Chen, staring at the display. "How do we fight something like that? There are too many of them, and they're spread across the entire galaxy." Tommy's smile broadened, and for the first time since the crisis began, he looked genuinely excited rather than simply determined. "Marcus, you're thinking about this the wrong way. We're not fighting them. We're throwing them a party they'll never forget." He activated a device that looked like a child's kaleidoscope crossed with a quantum computer. Immediately, holographic invitation cards began materializing throughout the command center, each one addressed to different species and civilizations across the galaxy. The invitations were written in languages that didn't exist, using concepts that had never been put into words, but somehow everyone who saw them understood exactly what they were being invited to participate in. "The galaxy's first and greatest interdimensional birthday party," Elena read from one of the cards. "Attendance mandatory for all conscious beings. Bring your own happiness, but we'll provide extra if you run out." Admiral Hayes felt a mixture of admiration and terror at the scope of what Tommy was proposing. You're inviting every civilization in the galaxy to a simultaneous celebration. The logistics alone would be impossible under normal circumstances. "Fortunately," Tommy replied cheerfully, "these aren't normal circumstances, and we're not using normal logistics." He gestured toward his fellow performers, whose images appeared as life-sized holograms throughout the command center. Each one was preparing celebration equipment that defied multiple laws of physics. Jessica was inflating balloons that expanded to the size of small moons, while remaining light enough to float on a whisper. Bobby was setting up a sound system that could broadcast music across interstellar distances, using harmonic resonance through the emotional substrate itself. The secret, Tommy explained to the assembled research team and military personnel, is understanding that happiness isn't just an emotion, it's a fundamental force of creation. When enough conscious beings experience genuine joy simultaneously, they don't just generate emotional energy. They actually increase the universe's capacity for consciousness itself. Dr. Park studied the readings coming from his instruments with fascination and growing excitement. The quantum resonance patterns suggest that synchronized emotional states can amplify each other exponentially rather than additively. If you could get even a fraction of the galaxy's population to experience peak happiness at the exact same moment, we'd create an emotional energy cascade that would not only repel the harvest entities but actually expand the boundaries of consciousness throughout this region of space, Tommy finished. The universe itself would become more alive, more aware, more capable of generating the positive emotions that make existence worthwhile. The preparation phase moved faster than anyone thought possible. Tommy's fellow performers had awakened with complete knowledge of their roles and access to entertainment technology that humanity's final generation had somehow developed in secret. Within hours, celebration stations were materializing in orbit around every populated world in the galaxy. These weren't simple party venues. They were massive constructs that existed partially in normal space and partially in the emotional substrate, designed to amplify and broadcast joy across interstellar distances. Each station was staffed by awakened human performers who could generate happiness fields powerful enough to affect entire star systems. Elena watched in amazement as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Civilizations that had been experiencing devastating depression suddenly found their populations laughing for the first time in decades. Species that had forgotten how to celebrate were spontaneously organizing festivals. Even the galaxy's most stoic and logical races were reporting unprecedented levels of what their philosophers could only describe as mathematical joy. The harvest entity's response was immediate and terrifying. They began attacking the celebration stations directly, materializing as vast shadows that tried to consume the happiness being generated faster than it could spread. But Tommy and his team had anticipated this reaction. Phase 2 initiation, Tommy announced, his voice now broadcasting simultaneously through 47 different dimensional frequencies. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all other gender configurations, it's time to show these cosmic party crashers what real entertainment looks like. What happened next defied every law of physics, psychology, and common sense that Elena had ever studied. The human performers didn't fight the harvest entities in any conventional way. Instead, they invited them to participate in the celebration. Jessica Buttercup approached the massive shadow entity attacking her station with a balloon animal, shaped like a perfect replica of the creature itself, rendered in cheerful pastels that somehow captured the entity's cosmic horror while making it appear adorable. "Oh my goodness," she said in a voice that carried across dimensional barriers. "You look absolutely fascinating. I bet you'd be amazing at party games. Have you ever tried musical chairs played across parallel dimensions?" The harvest entity's response was immediate confusion. It had spent millions of years feeding on consciousness without ever being directly addressed by its food. Jessica's genuine enthusiasm and complete lack of fear created emotional resonances that the entity had never encountered. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as Tommy's team engaged each harvest entity with personalized entertainment designed specifically for cosmic beings that existed primarily as hunger and shadow. Bobby Giggles taught one entity how to juggle miniature galaxies while keeping the beat to a song that existed only in the spaces between thoughts. Penny Sunshine convinced another entity to join a dance that required moving through 17 dimensions in perfect synchronization with the rotation of distant pulsars. The harvest entities found themselves in a situation they had never experienced in millions of years of feeding. They were having fun. The emotional energy they were consuming was being replaced faster than they could drain it. But more significantly, they were generating their own positive emotions for the first time in their existence. "Impossible," Elena breathed, watching the readings that showed harvest entities beginning to emit their own joy fields instead of simply consuming them. "They're learning to create happiness instead of just feeding on it." Tommy nodded, his expression showing the deep satisfaction of a plan coming together perfectly. "That was always the real strategy, Elena. You can't permanently defeat something by fighting it. but you can transform it by teaching it a better way to exist. The transformation accelerated as more harvest entities encountered the performer's relentless friendliness and genuine care. Beings that had spent eons as pure hunger discovered curiosity, creativity, and the peculiar pleasure of making others happy. The galaxy's emotional energy levels didn't just stabilize, they began climbing to heights that had never been recorded in galactic history. But the greatest transformation was still to come. As the synchronized celebration reached its crescendo, with trillions of beings across hundreds of thousands of worlds participating in the most massive party the universe had ever witnessed, something unprecedented happened. The emotional energy cascade that Tommy had predicted began to manifest, but its effects were far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Consciousness itself began to evolve, not just in individual beings, but as a fundamental property of reality. The universe started developing what could only be described as a sense of humor. Stars began to twinkle in rhythm with the galaxy-wide celebration. Planets adjusted their rotations to create better party lighting. Even black holes began emitting gravitational waves that harmonized with the music being broadcast from the celebration stations. "Tommy," Admiral Hayes said, her voice filled with wonder as she watched readings that showed reality itself becoming more joyful. "What have we done?" Tommy's smile had evolved beyond simple happiness into something that contained the wisdom of ages and the innocence of eternal childhood. "We've taught the universe to throw its own birthday party, Admiral. And it turns out that when reality itself learns to celebrate, everyone and everything becomes more alive than they ever imagined possible." The final phase of the transformation occurred when the harvest entities, now completely converted from consumers of consciousness to generators of cosmic joy, began sharing their dimensional manipulation abilities with the galaxy's civilizations. Suddenly, every species had access to technologies and perspectives that allowed them to experience existence in ways that had been impossible just hours before. Elena found herself able to perceive 17 different dimensions simultaneously, while still maintaining her normal consciousness. Marcus discovered that he could communicate directly with the emotional energy patterns that connected all living beings. Admiral Hayes realized that she could coordinate fleets across galactic distances by thinking happy thoughts in specific musical patterns. "And this is just the beginning," Tommy announced, as the celebration reached levels that required new words to describe. "Now that the universe knows how to have fun, it's going to keep getting better at it. Every day, every moment, reality itself will become more joyful, more creative, more alive." The harvest entities, now calling themselves the Joy Amplification Cooperative, began establishing permanent celebration stations throughout extragalactic space, spreading the transformed consciousness to other galaxies and dimensions. What had begun as a desperate defense against cosmic predators had become an ongoing expansion of happiness throughout all of reality. Elena stood beside Tommy on the observation deck of Luna 7, watching as the galaxy celebrated with an intensity that had literally rewritten the laws of physics to accommodate more sophisticated forms of happiness. "So what happens now?" she asked. Tommy produced a small wrapped present from apparently nowhere and handed it to her. When she opened it, she found a tiny replica of the universe itself, complete with miniature galaxies that sparkled with their own joy fields. "Now, Elena, we do what conscious beings have always done when they discover something wonderful. We share it with everyone we meet, and we keep finding new ways to make existence more amazing for everyone." As Elena held the tiny universe in her hands, watching its miniature civilizations celebrate across impossible distances, she realized that the greatest discovery of her archaeological career hadn't been finding Tommy Sparkleton. It had been learning that the universe itself was capable of growth, change, and most importantly, an ever-increasing capacity for joy. The celebration continued across the galaxy, but it was no longer an emergency response to cosmic threat. It had become the new natural state of existence, a reality where consciousness and happiness reinforced each other in an eternal dance of creation and delight. And at the center of it all, a former birthday clown smiled, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had successfully thrown the most important party in the history of everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.